Thanks for listening to Eat Your Content. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting the podcast through my merch store on TeePublic. Get great quality items like t-shirts, hats, mugs, and more, all sporting the vibrant Eat Your Content logo. Go to teepublic.com/user/eatyourcontent for more great items, and thanks for your support.
I'm being a bit of a provocateur here, but
No.
So why are you defining the South by way of a failed governmental experiment and a rebellion of 150 years ago?
Welcome to the Eat Your Content podcast. I'm your host, Rich Herrera, and this is your home for all things food and pop culture. Thank you for choosing my pod. You have many to choose from, but you chose mine, and I appreciate it. Just a reminder to follow me on socials, on Instagram, X, Facebook, TikTok, at Rich Herrera, and also at Eat Your Content. I'm also on the web at bio.site/eatyourcontent, and also just started a YouTube channel. So at Eat Your Content on YouTube, so make sure you follow along there. And like and subscribe to all of your podcast player of choice so you know when new episodes drop. Just a couple of program reminders. This is the continued series of the search for Jacksonville's food identity, living in Jacksonville, just trying to figure out why Jacksonville doesn't have a distinct food identity. And I've hosted a lot of knowledgeable writers and foodies, and I'm very happy to have today's guest on the show. He is the host of TrueSouth, a food travel show dedicated to Southern food, currently airing on the SEC network and streaming on Hulu. And from what I understand, season 7's coming soon, right? Is that correct?
Right.
Excellent. And he's also the founding director of the Southern Foodways Alliance, a group dedicated to the preservation and diverse culture of the American South. And he's also a James Beard Award-winning author of the best-selling book, The Pot Liquor Papers, A Food History of the Modern South. Also named Best Book of 2017 by NPR and Publishers Weekly. Welcome to the pod, Mr. John T. Edge. Did I get all the introductions correct?
That was too rich and too generous, but I appreciate it. I'm happy to be with you.
Well, thank you for the time and your expertise and talking about my hometown of Jacksonville, Florida, and looking forward to our conversation. So let's just dive right in. You're a Southern boy through and through. You were born smack dab in the middle of Georgia in the small rural community of Clinton in Jones County. You currently live in Oxford, right?
Yeah, Oxford, Mississippi. That's right.
And you got your undergraduate at UGA, your master's from the University of Mississippi. You founded the Southern Foodways Alliance in '99, and you've basically been traveling all over the South since 2008 for your show, TrueSouth. So yeah. You live, breathe, and love the American South. And you know, most people that are born in small towns can't wait to get out. You stuck around, you stayed in the region. What is it about the American South that you love so much and want to proclaim so much?
I mean, it's interesting. I grew up in a small town, but I did want to get out. You know, I grew up in about a 50-person town in Georgia, and I got out after college. I got to Atlanta, and to me, that was a city on a hill at that moment. You know, to get to a big city. So I did get out, and I did want to get out. Now I live in a small college town in Mississippi, which is something I never could have imagined after landing in Atlanta. But my interest in the South is an interest in trying to figure myself out, trying to figure my family out, trying to figure my life out, trying to figure out what it's like to live down here south of that line mapped by Mason and Dixon. For me, food was the way to do it, but you could use literature, you could use music, you could use religion, you could use any number of ways that we express ourselves. And I think about food as the way that we as a people express ourselves. And yeah, I love this place. But I'll say that for me, to love a place is also to be critical of a place. To love a thing, to love a place, to love another human is to want the best out of them and the best from them. And I think part of loving the South is being critical of the South. And I bind that up in it. I don't think there's a duality here. I don't think I love the South and I hate the South. I love the South, and part of loving the South is being critical of the South.
Right. I mean, you love the South so much. You like you said, you want to see the best of it. You know, it does annoy me when people are like, well, if you don't like it, just leave. It's like, no, that's not what I'm talking about here. You know, if I didn't love it, I wouldn't care so much to see things that need to be changed. And you were talking about, you know, working in the South and living through the South through its food. What is it about the American Southern food that's unique from all regional areas of the country. Like I lived in Michigan for a while and I moved to Georgia, and the first time I was offered grits, I'm like, what's a grit? So
Yeah.
what is it about American Southern food that makes it so unique to us versus other regions?
I think the two primary things are the long history of rurality in the South. That's a hard word to get out of my mouth. Uh, but this place was country for the longest time. This place was agricultural for the longest time. We were laggard in our evolution to what is now basically a service economy. We were an agricultural economy longer than most other regions of the country, and that imprinted upon us. And that's in our taste for corn, and our grits shows that. We grew corn, we ground corn, we ate corn. The other distinct imprint upon the South that makes our food different, that makes the South different, is the imprint of racism, and the impact in the most positive of ways of African people and people of African descent landing on these shores, doing work, making lives, building the South. And those two things make the South different, make our food different, make our music different, make us. I mean, it's not even different. It's like what makes the South are those two driving forces.
Yeah, and you mentioned the race aspect of it, and I think what's unique to the South versus the rest of the country too is the history of slavery in the South versus other parts of the country, where things that we call uniquely Southern foods were really, slave foods that they could, make with the offcuts of meat that the slave masters had, and they gave the offcuts to the slaves, and they did the best they could with it. But now that's regional cuisine, and you're seeing 5-star restaurants serving oxtail that wouldn't be the case back then, and I think that is a distinct varietal of food in this country versus other parts of the country. And I like how you said rurality. That is hard. Rurality.
It's hard to say, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it'll play in Scrabble though. I think it'll work.
Yeah.
But
It would,
and
to your point, like, yes, it is, there are foods that we can isolate and say this is a food of enslavement. That could be, pot liquor and cornbread with the cornbread crumble up into pot liquor is definitely a
right.
food of enslavement that is translated to today. So many foods, though, are a product of the conjunction of West African peoples and the foods that are native to North America, and the influence of, not only, white people like me, but, immigrants who came from other places at other times. I live not far from the Mississippi Delta, and one of the strongest influences there are Chinese families who came to work, were brought into work at first cotton, ended up opening the country stores, corner stores of the Mississippi Delta. And, you see their influence in the Mississippi Delta, just as you see tamales as the primary kind of snack food of the Mississippi Delta. That's a remnant of Mexican-American cotton pickers at the turn of the 20th century. So the South really represents this kind of crossroads of many people and many cultures. The South isn't an isolate. It isn't an exception to kind of the American story. It is the American story.
Right. And it's interesting you say the crossroads that the South is. It's not a monolith, right? So that's kind of interesting that we segue kind of into Florida, where Florida is weird. I mean, just beyond the Florida man stories, right? But geographically, it's weird. It's in the South geographically, but culturally speaking, it's not considered the South. I think sweet tea stops becoming the default tea around Daytona. So
who doesn't consider it the South? Like I call BS on that.
Well, I will say McDonald's doesn't consider it the South. When they started doing breakfast, biscuits was not the default breakfast thing down here in Florida.
Since when should McDonald's be a barometer for any damn thing?
No, you're right. But when you think of like Miami or Tampa or St. Pete, you don't. For me, the South doesn't come to mind right away as Southern as like Atlanta or Savannah or Charleston.
I mean, but it depends on what do you define as Southern. Like, so tell me that.
Well, okay, so I grew up in Michigan, and the South was kind of new to me. I lived half my life up north, half my life down south. I moved to Savannah when I was like 12, 13 years old. So the South to me, immediately on my first impression, were antebellum homes, the downtown River Street, Savannah area. That to me is South. The Southern drawl, like where I'm at now in Florida. I'm shocked when I hear a Southern accent in Jacksonville.
So just I'm being a bit of a provocateur here, but
No.
so why are you defining the South by way of a failed governmental experiment and a rebellion of 150 years ago?
Okay, yeah, I see your point. But
you're looking at the surface, and you're looking at the bright shiny things
sure.
that maybe a tourism commission of 50 years ago wanted you to see, and you're smarter than that, man. Come on.
Well, pop culturally speaking, when you talk to the normal Joe on the street, Florida, most people wouldn't consider Florida stereotypically Southern, and I use air quotes, stereotypically Southern. You know what I mean. You understand what I'm talking about with that.
And like, to me, that's what's so great about Jacksonville, because I think of Jacksonville, it's a port city. Like New Orleans is a port city, like Houston is a port city, a place of many people who come together to make something new out of this place they arrive. And that's a Southern story too. It's a Southern story in Houston in the 21st century. It was a, 18th, 19th century New Orleans story. And it was a 20th century, story of Jacksonville. So I just suggest that, like, people who are looking to define the South in the ways that they inherited, that's one of the things that I love. And I'm being playful here and picking on you, and you know that.
Sure. Oh, of course.
But one of the things I love about making True South is we get to wander around and turn our cameras toward stories of the South that are real and true. But you have to look past the Moonlight Magnolias myth to get at them. And Jacksonville's full of them.
Yeah.
And North Florida is full of them, and Central Florida is full of it. And, if you do want to look back to old Confederate ways, like, have you ever driven the Dixie Highway through Miami?
No, I have not.
I mean, there it is. I mean, it's not my measure of what makes Miami a Southern place. I think of Miami as a Latin Southern place, and I find it interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm getting way off topic.
No. I love it. No, you are right. I've asked other people this, and they never took me to task on, well, what do you consider Southern? So no, I appreciate the talk, and it makes me think, like, okay, yeah, all the exposure I've had in the South is as a Yankee coming to the South, right? And as a kid and being an impressionable teenager, and man, it was culture shock. Moving from Michigan to Savannah was a culture shock. Everybody said I talked funny, and I'm like, no, you talk funny. Like, what's a grit? And, you put gravy on your biscuits? What is going on here? I don't understand and, you'd have thought I walked into another country for a while, but then, you assimilate and you move on. But you're right. Who gets to define the Southernness? And there's kind of an inside joke with Jacksonville that Jacksonville is Southern Georgia. And then once you get past Daytona, it's not the South. People are saying it's not the South anymore after Daytona.
Maybe the way to think about it is that there are many Souths. There's not one.
Sure.
Right? So
sure.
There are, there's the Mississippi Delta, which is very different from the Low Country of South Carolina. And the Low Country, by a lot of different definitions, extends from North Carolina down to Florida. That mythical place about which people kind of rhapsodize. East Texas, to me, is profoundly Southern place. Not just Houston, which I think is like a 21st century Creole city of the South. Not just Houston, but East Texas. There's a good argument to be made that the Balcones, what do they call the Balcones escarpments just across from Austin, or where the topography really changes, and maybe if you're going to do it by way of geography, the South ends. You could be in the south side of Chicago, where so many Black Mississippians landed when they left the Jim Crow South. That's the South. So is Oakland, California. It's just like the interesting thing to think about is like as soon as we get into the idea of you belong and you don't belong, the
Yeah.
reason that rankles me is that comes back again to like the dang Civil War. Like there's Yankees and there's Southerners. Like I don't like the one person belongs and the other one doesn't. Like I just think if you live in this place and you aim to contribute, you're a Southerner.
Yeah.
If you choose to live here, and that's why I think about immigrants as probably the most, the boldest and most, and the Southerners I admire the most because they've chosen to live here and make a life here, to build their families here, to start businesses here. And, you know, the idea of excluding them from this, that's crazy train.
Immigrants, we get the job done.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, it's like
now like I'm running for political office or something. I'll stop.
Hey, no. It's all good. I appreciate it. So, you know, it's like that old saying goes, wherever you are or wherever you go, there you are, right?
Yeah.
So, so let's talk about Jacksonville specifically. Now, you have not filmed a True South episode in Jacksonville, as far as I know, but you came close.
Yeah.
You were in St. Augustine.
Yeah.
So to kind of give myself a primer, you know, I watched some True South episodes and I saw the St. Augustine one, and you hit a lot of cool places in St. Augustine that I've seen or been to. And one thing that you have kind of landed on with what defined St. Augustine from a cultural standpoint, it was the daddle pepper, right? And I think Jacksonville kind of sort of adopted that, being that we're kind of close to St. Augustine. So what is it that makes a food, a cultural identity of that particular place? Like you talk about the daddle pepper St. Augustine, and then like in Tampa, Miami, you have the Cuban sandwich and so on. And you just know that if you want a good one, you go here. But Jacksonville isn't really known for any one particular kind of food or cuisine. And for a city the size of 1 million, you would kind of think maybe there should be.
But
What's your thoughts on that?
Couldn't it be known for like a pita sandwich with a side of tabbouleh and a cherry limeade?
Yeah. And I was going to talk about the Desert Rider. What made you land on the Desert Rider as the key signature thing that you think is the key signature thing of Jacksonville?
Well, I'd back up from that and say I think Jacksonville is really good at sandwiches. Just more generally, I think like it's a really strong sandwich culture. It reminds me again, like if you make a comparison to New Orleans, you think about the muffaletta sandwich and the po' boy sandwich. You know, those are both foods of labor out of New Orleans. Po' boy came out of streetcar workers strike. The muffaletta came out of dock workers buying Italian sandwiches. So those are foods of labor, and those are the sandwiches that make New Orleans a great sandwich town. And New Orleans, like Jacksonville, is a port town and a working class town beyond, the glam of the French Quarter or the grime of the French Quarter, whatever you want to say. New Orleans is a town where people love their dang sandwiches. And I've seen the same thing in St. Augustine, not just in the pita sandwiches on Arabic bread or tucked into Arabic bread, but places like where else did I go? Blue Boy sandwiches. Which I thought was great. I had, it was like in an old Ponderosa. And I had a really great steak sandwich there, a lot heavy on Worcestershire sauce. They baked their own bread. That's hard to find. I went to, where else did I go? I went to All American there in Jacksonville. And
yeah, that's a great place.
I love that place. I met the Mr. Salome, and like father and son were there, and like the father was basically doing a stand-up routine in the middle of the restaurant. He was amazing. And they do have steak pitas, and I thought those were great. But this isn't a sandwich, but they also they took such care with things. I found, like for a place that fed straight up working people, that's a little rough around the edges. They took so much care. Like I got a chili dog, and my bun was toasted perfectly. And they get their buns baked by somebody to their specifications. And, and I found that same quality at Blue Boy. And then the last day I was there, I went to Rusto's, kind of in the shadow of the stadium. And I met Melody and Russ, who own it. And like Russ tells me about this was his grandmother's house. And, I had like a perfect breakfast sandwich, again, tucked in the Arabic bread, that, was pretty far divorced from the idea of what you might think of as a writer, as something that was Arabic or Middle Eastern. It was pretty distinctly American or Southern. It was a sausage and egg sandwich. It might as well have been a sausage and egg biscuit. Served early in the morning to construction workers and anybody else who was up at I think we were there at 5.
Oh, wow.
But I came away from all that just thinking Jacksonville does sandwiches as good or better than any place I've been.
Yeah.
But it's hard sometimes. And, who am I? I'm just a kid that shows up in Jacksonville and eats. But it struck me in this last visit, which was maybe when we were scouting that St. Augustine episode, we spent time in Jacksonville scouting a potential show in Jacksonville. And the sandwiches, just everybody, I was there with my buddy and our executive producer, Wright Thompson, and we both came away with admiration for the people we met, the Salames, Melody and Russ at Russ and Daughters. I can't remember the name of the guy, Blue Boy. He was great too. But y'all are a great sandwich town. Why can't that be the banner you carry?
You kind of wonder with a city like Jacksonville that's got an ocean on one side and a river down the middle, how seafood didn't become Jacksonville's signature thing. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. Y'all still got the remnants of some of the old fish camps there.
Yeah.
But, the problem with those kinds of places is often, and this I'm not saying it's the case with all the places in Jacksonville, is about 20 years ago people discovered that fish camps were cool, so they fixed them up went the prices. Then the Cisco truck showed up around back, and they're not what they used to be. And there are very few of them that are just as good as they used to be, that are still serve working class people. There was a place that I loved between Jacksonville and Savannah called Speed's Kitchen. And I just read recently that Speed's was closing or had closed, or maybe I hope that's wrong. But Speed's was 2 trailers that looked like they'd been dropped in the grass, beneath a bunch of oaks at Shellman's Bluff, Georgia. And they had great oyster stew and fried shrimp. But it had not, no focus group had imagined it. No one had reinvented it. It just was.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to find. That's why Osteen's is so great, because nobody decided this place is a little dingy, we're going to fix it up. And then, let's add gator bites to the menu. I mean, it's a place that's endured and people love it for that. And I think that's the problem with hanging your hat on the excellence of your fish camps. Too many of them swam back upstream.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned All American. I had my very first camel rider for the first time, about a month ago, maybe. Yeah. And you look at it and it is very humble. It's very humble. It's cold cuts, it's Italian dressing, it's onions, it's tomatoes, it's lettuce, and a pita. And I was like, what's the big deal about this? And this was after I read your article in the New York Times. I'm like, all right, I got to try this for myself. So I went and I was like, this is really good. It's something I feel like I could make at home, but it wouldn't taste the same. And it's just whatever they use for their meats and their vegetables and their dressing. It was very delicious at All American, and I haven't had one anywhere else yet, so I don't have a point of comparison. But All Americans was pretty good. So I agree with you that we do here in Jacksonville have a lot of places that sell rider sandwiches. We have the Chic chain that is all over the place here in Jacksonville.
The first place I really went was the Chic. Yeah.
Yeah. So I agree with you. I think we should make that, if our Chamber of Commerce has any marketing dollars to put behind something, that would probably be the one, right?
Plenty of marketing dollars, but I think the challenge is it is a working class food, and the challenge is can the Chamber of Commerce understand how a rider is the same thing as a po' boy, and look at what New Orleans has done marketing itself as the home of the po' boy. It's the same thing, and y'all are baking your own bread. It's something to exalt. It's something to celebrate. like I'm talking myself into definitely making a show because I want to make that argument, right?
See, that was the real the real thing I had about this interview is to get you to Jacksonville, film an episode, and so we can be in there. So speaking of that, though, you guys you said you and your producers scouted Jacksonville. Just in general, what makes a good like True South location episode? I know your show's on the SEC network, so I'm sure you hit a lot of the the SEC school towns, of course. But you go outside of that. So what are you looking for in a city like Jacksonville? You mentioned a few places, and what are the common themes that you look for to make a good True South episode at a location?
Well, I mean, there's got to be unimpeachably good food, and
Sure.
and you start there, and then you got to feel good in the place, the restaurant, because that like people are going to travel behind the show and go to the restaurant. So if the food's really good and the people are jerks, then it doesn't work,
Right.
And then the other thing is like there's got to be a bigger story, right? There's got to be something more than this is great food, and even more than these are nice people. But what's the bigger story you're trying to tell? So, we made an episode last year set in the Black Belt of Alabama about barbecue ostensibly, but it was really about art and about craft and about how people tell the story of their place through, there's a middle act that's about people quilting. There's a middle act about an arts council in a small town. Like, there's got to be some way to tell a bigger story about the place, and that's got to reside in those two restaurants. The story does. So Jacksonville, I don't know. I think it's to me, it's the port as a driver of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
My paternal grandmother moved to Jacksonville from Ogdensburg, New York, and met my grandfather there. She was cleaning houses, and he was he'd come there to look for a job in the ports. And so I think the ports bring a lot of people, or have. It's probably not as dynamic a part of the city as it was 75 years ago, but it's still a way to define the place. And ports are where boats from other places show up on your shores, and that metaphor and that reality change a place. So to me, I'd be interested in those port stories. I'd be interested in the origin stories of different families. A lot of the writer stories, as you know better than I do, take us back to the Middle East.
Yep.
This is a moment in the history of our world when conflict defines the Middle East. But here are people who came to America for a new chance, a new way to live, living in peace and harmony. And Middle Eastern stories. I'll have a former mayor who was of Lebanese ancestry.
Yeah.
You could tell a story of a South that's long been more diverse than people expect by just looking at Jacksonville.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe season 8, we will see a Jacksonville, maybe a Jacksonville episode in season 8.
To not be Corey, yeah, I'd really love that. I'm hoping we're going to get to do that, but who knows? Because it's we have to figure out travel schedules. We have to figure out, drive times, because the South is basically the size of, Western Europe. So it's a lot of territory to cover.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I look forward to seeing that possibly. And, if you're in town, we'll go somewhere and we'll share some stories. That'd be great.
The other thing that it could work is like Filipino food. There's such strong.
I was going to mention that.
Yeah. And I did a good bit of research and did a deep dive on that. I'm interested in that too.
Yeah, we have the largest Filipino population in Florida, and we don't have a Little Manila, which always kind of bugged me, right? So we have a lot of really great Filipino restaurants and some really cool stories. Like in October, I did a series of interviews with Filipino chefs and telling their stories of how they got here. And that would be a great thing to highlight if you ever come back to Jacksonville. So that would be awesome.
I want to a couple of links to those when we get through.
Yeah, to the podcast of those chefs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely email them to you. Definitely.
Thank you.
Some really great stories there. And there's a documentary they just hosted here with the nursing shortage and bringing in Filipino nurses and how we're working on that. So I'll send you the link to those. That'd be great.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So before we go, I know your time is limited. I want to give you a chance to just promote whatever you got going on in your life, and where can people find you on social media, and when is the new season going to drop, and all that.
So we'll thank you for that opportunity. The new season of TrueSouth will begin right as the college football season begins in August this year, and there'll be 7 episodes this season. We're welcoming Oklahoma and Texas to the SEC, and while our choices of episodes and locations don't necessarily reflect college towns, we just use the SEC footprint as our footprint. We are going to focus this time on Austin and Oklahoma City is our 2 first episodes. So I'm excited about those, and you can watch those. They'll each premiere on SEC Network and then re-air on ESPN and then stream on Hulu. So, we're pretty easy to find now, which is great. And this is season 7 for us. So we've made a lot of TV, and we've gotten better at it. My colleague Tim Horgan, our director in music, savant, and our executive producer Wright Thompson, and then a crazy and beautiful cohort of makers of scenes with big old cameras. I'm in their debt every single day, because I still am gobsmacked that I get to make a television show. But then I look around at them and I realize they actually know what they're doing. So.
So Texas and Oklahoma first 2 episodes, that's what you call brand synergy right there. Brand synergy with the SEC. So, and we talked through email. You said you're working on a memoir. So how's that going? When are we looking at that being published?
That's going to be a while. I'm happier with my memoir than I have been in the past. It's under contract to Francis Lamb, an editor at Crown, and a very good editor at Crown. And I hope it's out soonish. It's at least a year and a half out. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Yeah, we'll be looking for that.
It's a while.
And where can people find you on socials if they wanted to follow John T around?
All my socials, the most active of my social media is Instagram, and it's John T Edge, just my name. I'm also on Twitter, though I don't really post that much. I repost some people's stuff. I'm happier in Instagram.
Okay. So you know where to find him on Instagram at John T Edge. And don't forget to follow me on socials as well at Rich Herrera and at Eat Your Content on Instagram and all other major social media feeds. Mr. John T Edge, thank you so much for your time. And I appreciate talking to you and putting me to task on what really Southern is. So I'm
feeling guilty because I went too hard at you. I'm sorry.
No, man, I love this stuff. I take no offense, and I love it. And I could have gone on forever, but I know you got other things to do besides talk to me. So I appreciate your time, and thank you for being on the pod.
Thank you, Rich. I enjoyed the conversation. Take care.
All right. Thank you. You too.